Columbia. The purpose of this audit is to analyze and report on how the district serves crossover youth. And we'll talk more about crossover youth as they're defined in the report and nationally. And the focus was 2 DC agencies, although by no means are these the only 2 agencies that touch the lives of crossover youth. So the 2 agencies are the Child and Family Services Agency, or CFSA, which is the child welfare organization for the District of Columbia, and the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, which is where youth who are, is a youth justice or the youth justice organization of the District of Columbia, although there are other organizations that play a role in that system. So just a couple of audit details before we start. The work on this audit began over 2 years ago in 2022, and most of the work on the report in terms of the gathering of data and drafting of findings, much of this was done before I started at CCE in December. So there was a lot of work done by former staff members of CCE and much work done by a steering committee, which guided the work throughout the process. The data that was gathered included court records from the Superior Court, Family Court, case file reviews from DYRS and CFSA, interviews, focus groups, and surveys, as well as a literature review. So quite a bit of data analysis went into this report. And I'm trying to figure out why it's not forwarding. Hang on. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Marissa, am I on the right page now? It says about crossover youth.
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. Okay, so when we're talking about crossover youth, we're talking about young people who are 21 years or younger who have been involved with the child welfare system and involved in the youth justice system. And I just wanted to differentiate between dual jacketed youth, who are young people who have open cases with both the child welfare and the delinquency system at the same time. So you'll see there's sort of a center circle, which is the crossover youth. The top half of the circle are dual jacketed youth. But this report and DC statute considers all of these youth who may also have a closed child welfare case and an open delinquency case, or vice versa, to also be crossover youth. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about crossover youth and the issue. So it's really not just a District of Columbia issue. Crossover youth is a national issue. It is estimated in the US, about 30% of youth with child welfare involvement will become involved in the youth justice system at some point in their life. And sort of conversely, there have been several studies of urban jurisdictions that found that about 2 in 3 youth who are in the justice system had been in the child welfare system at some point. So it's a really fairly widespread issue. Why is this so? There's quite a bit more information in the report, but here's just a couple of key points that we wanted to make today. One is that maltreatment, so being involved in the child welfare system because of abuse and or neglect, has been shown to be a risk factor for youth justice involvement. One reason for this is that youth in the child welfare system are disproportionately likely to have a high number of what are called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And these ACEs have been recognized by researchers as being such experiences as abuse and neglect, parental incarceration, having family members with substance use disorders and mental health issues, and exposure to community and domestic violence. So having these sorts of experiences have been shown to be related to becoming justice involved, and youth who are in the child welfare system are more likely to have them. And youth and engage in serious delinquent behavior, I should also add. Another reason is that youth in the child welfare system are more likely to have other experiences that can result in becoming justice involved. We know that youth in the child welfare system are disproportionately youth of color, who may experience disproportionate contact with the justice system. Their families are often living in low-income situations, and they may live in neighborhoods that have significant law enforcement presence. So this is not to say all the issues are related to ACEs. in terms of why youth may end up as crossover youth, but this is just some of the findings that we see nationally. So in terms of us looking at this issue and focusing our attention on it, obviously, if there was nothing that could be done about crossover youth, it would be a sad situation, a tragic situation, but you know, why study it? Why consider this as a policy issue? Well, the reason is because what has been shown nationally is that targeted efforts at addressing the needs of crossover youth pay off. They pay off both for the youth themselves in terms of improved life outcomes, and they also are related to improvements in their reduction in reoffending and involvement in various types of crime, either as youth or as an adults. So the type of efforts that we're talking about are on both the individual level and the system level. So on an individual level, there's research that shows that providing more positive youth experiences for crossover youth can reduce the likelihood that they will become involved in future delinquency or adult justice system involvement. So these include positive youth childhood experiences are around involvement with adults, having healthy relationships with adults, involvement in school and sports and recreation. So looking at these as sort of protective factors for these young people. On a system level, Georgetown's crossover youth practice model has demonstrated that specialized and coordinated care and improved communication and coordination between agencies can improve outcomes for both youth and public safety. As you can see, here is a little box from their website that shows some of the improvements. So reductions in recidivism, the number of youth who have new juvenile justice petitions, the use of detention, and the increase in permanency as a goal. They have seen increases in engagement in pro-social activities, educational outcomes, and other justice involvement and school issues. So for these reasons, you know, it makes sense to really look at this youth because you can improve their outcomes and improve the outcomes for community safety as well. So let's shift gears here and talk about what we know about crossover youth in the District of Columbia. First, just to reemphasize, the statute creating the Office of the Ombudsperson for Children, which is responsible for producing reports about this population, defines a person as a crossover youth if they are 21 years of age or younger, who is or was involved with or otherwise known to CFSA, and has a current or closed delinquency case filed by the DC Office of the Attorney General or another jurisdiction. So just to be clear, when we're talking about our data that we looked at from the Superior Court, which we're going to talk about next, we looked at youth who were had an active delinquency case between 2018 and 2022. And for the CFSA cases, it had to be a substantiated case of abuse or neglect at any point in the child's life. So we constrained it a little bit to look at youth who had whose cases were substantiated, not just known to. So how many crossover youth are in DC? That seemed an important question for us to answer to understand the scope of the problem. And what we found is that while OFC, the Office for the Ombudsman for Children, is charged with annually collecting data on crossover youth and their outcomes, CFSA and DYRS have only provided that office with information on dual-jacketed youth, so only youth who had concurrent cases with these agencies. And while CCE also directly requested information on all crossover youth, the two agencies only provided information on dual-jacketed youth. Therefore, for this audit, CCE looked at various data sources and also conducted qualitative and quantitative research to understand the population of crossover youth in the district and their experiences. What we found is that in looking at Superior Court cases of crossover youth, during the audit period, there were 181 unique crossover youth in the district. And of those youth, all except 10 were identified in court records as being African American. Of these crossover youth, 70 at some point were dual jacketed, while 111 had non-concurrent involvement with both systems. And this was usually a CFSA case closed prior to the delinquency case being opened. And as you can see here in the large box, when we looked at a point in time for crossover youth, we saw that at the end of fiscal year 2022, there were 93 youth with who are crossover youth in the district. This compares with the report in fiscal year 2023 to the Office for the Ombudsman of Children of only 8 youth, and these were dual jacketed with DYRS and CFSA. So this is just a graph showing the issue of the youth who were concurrently involved, so that would be dual jacketed, and non-concurrently involved. And you can see of the non-concurrently involved, generally the first involvement was with CFSA. And that case was closed, and then the delinquency case opened thereafter. And I also want to emphasize that this is really a floor for this number. We don't know what the ceiling is for a variety of reasons. A primary one of those being that we live in a district which borders 2 states very closely, and half of DC kids are in foster care. That's half of DC kids who are in foster care live in Maryland, roughly. So if these kids pick up a delinquency charge in Maryland where they live, we would not know that they are a crossover youth from our Superior Court data. It would require collaboration with Maryland in order to get a fuller sense of how many kids were dually involved. And the same, there's a few kids in Virginia, but overwhelmingly, most of the kids who are in foster care in another state are in Maryland right now. So now I want to turn to what we know about these crossover youth. So, let me just point this out first. One is that, I mentioned the issue with Maryland being one group of crossover youth that we don't consider. While the Superior Court data does show that CSSD has involvement with many of these cases, in our audit, because we focused on these 2 DC agencies, we really were not able to gather information about youth on probation in the district. But that would definitely be an agency that would be integral to sort of a more comprehensive approach to crossover youth. And here you can see that almost half of youth who had their delinquency adjudicated, who are crossover youth, were in probation. And you can see many youth had a dismissal or a diversion. And again, that's an interesting question is, looking at how many of these youth who may have started with a dismissal or a diversion, did they later become more deeply involved in the system? And that's not a question we could answer very well with our research, but it would definitely be one for the district generally. So now talking about some of the other data we were able to find out. So we worked with both CFSA and DYRS to get some cases to review, to look at some of the characteristics of crossover youth in the district. So this graph is showing you 24 cases that were chosen at random of youth who are 10 years old or older who are in CFSA. And half of those youth were crossover youth. They had a delinquency system involvement, and half didn't. And as you can see, the case file review from CFSA showed crossover youth were more likely to have parents with a criminal conviction record, school issues, including suspensions and truancy, learning disabilities, and individual education plans, IEPs, and were more likely to have a diagnosis of mental health. So these are definitely issues that can impact a young person's lives and make their progressing to adulthood challenging. And so we see this difference here in CFSA youth, and they're having substantially more challenges than those who are the crossover youth than those who are in CFSA who were not just as involved. Then we looked at DRS involved crossover youth. So of the cases, the 181 cases that we saw in the records that we looked at, we randomly selected 25 cases to submit to DRS and asked for their case files to review their, some of the experiences these youth have had. And what we saw, and this was coded by one of our staff people at CCE, they used the official sort of recognized ACEs scale that has been developed. And as you can see, the youth who were these crossover youth, and again, this is in a comparison sample because it's all crossover youth, but it shows that many of them have had a number of adverse childhood experiences in their lifetime, with the most common being having a household member with a behavioral health issue, either mental illness or substance use disorder. And this is followed by neglect, having a household member who is incarcerated, being witnessing community violence or domestic violence and physical abuse. So many of these youth had a number of these ACEs, which have been shown to have a serious impact on young people, both as youth, but also as they progress into adulthood. So I would say that, one of the key findings really is that more information is needed on these crossover youth. There's just not enough information on them to know really how to best support them in some cases, and also how to protect them. One of the points that we make in the report is that the Child Fatality Review Committee, which is under the DC Medical Examiner's Office, reviewed 9 non-infant child deaths from 2018 to 2020. And what they found was, of these, 8 were homicides, and all of the homicides that they looked at were crossover youth. So these youth, while they may be engaged in delinquent behavior, they are also victims, frequently victims of violent crime. And so looking at how best to serve these youth and also find ways to reduce their likelihood of victimization is should be something that we as the adults in the room need to take seriously. There was no educational data on crossover youth. So what you're looking at here is the DC report card from 2022 to 2023 school year of high school students. And this is looking at youth in foster care versus all report card students. And so what we saw was that youth in foster care were more likely to experience the different factors that could lead them to justice involvement, to becoming crossover youth. They were more likely to be suspended. They were more likely to be arrested. They were more likely to be chronically absent. And in addition, they were more likely to not graduate in 5 years or less. So, looking at crossover youth would be, and their educational goals and their educational outcomes would be important as a piece of a more comprehensive approach to this group, because we can see already that youth in foster care are having a number of educational issues that set them apart from all youth. So I wanted to turn now to the actual audit findings. So this is where we sort of turned to how effective the district is at addressing the needs of crossover youth. And what I'll present is just the top line findings. So we have a number of recommendations in the report that I am not going to go through today, but I hope you'll read the report, or at least take a look at the ones that you feel are closest to your interests, and see if you have if we see that there's other things that we've missed, we'd love to talk with you. But what I've done with each of these is I mentioned we did interviews and focus groups, and what we found was that we tried to pair some of the comments that these youth made with some of these findings, because they definitely were a piece of those findings, and they really led to us developing the findings that we settled on. So the first 2 findings are that CFSA and DRS failed to utilize a definition of crossover youth consistent with the DC code, and therefore they failed to identify the full population of crossover youth. So again, noting that where CFSA and DRS do, for example, provide data, it is only for the dual jacketed youth, and so they are not identifying the full population of crossover youth. Second, we note that neither agency identifies crossover youth as statutorily defined in any of their guiding documents, in their data management systems, policies, or practices. And they also do not recognize that crossover youth have unique needs requiring specialized case management and programming. So one of the issues, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I just wanted to sort of highlight, we had quotes from both professionals such as guardians ad litem and youth defenders and social workers. And this is from one of the folks we had in a focus group. And it talked about how when youth are just in the child welfare system, they're seen as being sort of the victim, but then once they become caught up in the delinquency side, it's almost like they've forgotten about the first half of their lives, which is an important point because, as we talked about earlier, the effects of being involved in the child welfare system, of experiencing maltreatment, they have lasting impacts. So this quote, it feels like they go from being seen as a neglected child to the child blaming. And you cannot compartmentalize trauma on the neglect side and accountability on the delinquency side. So this idea that we need to not forget the experiences that these youth have had in the child welfare system as we start to think about how to address any delinquent behavior that they've engaged in. And I wanted to point this out because we had a small survey. Well, the survey was sent out to case management staff for both CFSA and DYRS, and we had as you can see, about I'm not sure if the 31 is all of it's pretty close to it. So somewhere in the range of a 30 to 40 responses were received, and we asked these case managers, are you aware of any specific protocol for a crossover youth case? And as you can see, most of them, over half of them said no, they were not aware of any specific protocol for a crossover youth case. And just to note that in 2017, there was a protocol that was set up for at least dual jacketed youth that was included in a staff handbook, but clearly this 2017 protocol and memorandum of understanding was not widely recognized or used in these agencies. The questionnaire also asked if they had received any training geared specifically toward understanding and or serving crossover youth, and more than 9 out of 10 said that they had not received any special training. So this need for staff training and protocols for these youth that staff are aware of is one of the key findings of this report. Next, finding number 3, there is insufficient communication, collaboration, and data sharing among agencies regarding crossover youth. In the report, we talk about how this plays out and in terms of not having youth having a system, a single case, really case management or case plan for them that addresses both their needs on the neglect and abuse side and their needs on the delinquency side. And these are just some of the direct comments that we received about that sort of demonstrate some of these challenges. There can be duplicative things that can cause a youth to be overwhelmed. It becomes counterproductive. So a young person could be having, so many different requirements from both systems that it's making it difficult for them to, just be a kid and move on with their lives. Most foster homes are in Maryland. I have no system to look them up in unless the client is over 18. And just the challenges of that, having to leave voicemails, never hearing back, not having any sort of a system connect there to know if these youth have, for example, become just as involved in Maryland. It is re-traumatizing for youth to keep having to explain their situations. So, if you have a case manager and they enter, say, DYRS, and they have to go through their whole history and talk about all these issues, when some of this could have been shared, confidentially between case managers and could have prevented that re-traumatization. And this assumption that, if a youth is dual involved, maybe the other system is providing the services, and, having that communication and collaboration could ensure that that case managers know what is being provided on both sides. So finding 4, CFSA and DYRS should develop and utilize evidence-based protocols, policies, and programs and services specific to crossover youth, and also for preventing crossover. We do know that there's certain risk factors for a youth crossing over from the child welfare system. For example, having multiple placements in the child welfare system is one of them. And also, knowing what are some of the risk factors for justice involvement in general, we would, in a best case scenario, you would like to have a child, if they are involved in the child welfare system and they are showing some of these risk factors, that there is an intentional effort to address those, especially as they head towards adolescence, that could land them in the justice system. So we want to serve crossover youth. We want to prevent crossover youth as well. But looking at, what are the protocols? What are the policies? How are they developed? And are they evidence-based in terms of what's been shown to help dually involved youth? You can see here, these are all comments from crossover youth. There were young adults who had been crossover youth very recently. This idea that they had nowhere to put me, and then they put me in the foster home. This idea that there's not sufficient services. I was 15 and they were so hard on me. They gave me no chances. I felt like I could not complete the program because they wanted too much. I wish they worked 7 days a week. The weekends were the hardest part. When you think about some of these youth, if the juvenile justice system doesn't sort of recognize that the youth may have needs on the weekends, especially if they don't have family members who they feel like they can trust and confide in, they may have different needs, personal needs, than a youth who is just justice involved, but there's a strong family, strong adults in their lives to help them. And also this issue of recognizing that they may have more gaps in terms of the life skills needed to successfully transition to adulthood. You can see here, they were just in charge of us and did everything for us, but we should learn. The idea of needing to understand, for example, how to fill out a school or program application, how to, apply for housing, those sorts of things. And then finally, CFSA and DRS, they have some well-regarded and promising programs, but some of the gaps that were mentioned are identified in the report, and we really don't have information sort of on the scope and capacity of existing programs and their effectiveness for this population in order to really understand what additional services would be required and would be beneficial. You can see, youth, we can find a great coworker at each agency that can make all the difference. So there are the staff of these agencies are folks who are caring about these youth, but they need the tools as well in order to best serve these young people. The Credible Messenger program was mentioned by not a lot of the youth as being effective, and this is a program where young people are matched often with formerly justice involved individuals or other individuals who they can relate with, adults, and they serve as these positive adult role models that can help as a protective factor in their lives. And then we need help getting jobs, not retail jobs, but one with a career path. You can see this idea that you're really needing that help that for some other young people in the district, they might be getting from, for example, family or others that they may not have access to in their lives. And so I guess I would just close by saying that, this was a product of many people's efforts over a long period of time. And, we really hope that it spurs action among both the district agencies, but also to collaborate outside of those agencies with those that are controlled by the federal government as well as in other states. So with that, I'll stop sharing. And if folks have questions, I assume that Marissa maybe will be the monitor of questions and help us through a question and answer period.
Sure. So we have one question right now in our Q&A function. It's from Michaela Deming saying, we have heard from youth and seen research on concerns about information sharing. Any exploration about privacy concerns?
This has been definitely an issue that we heard throughout the process, was how do we do this right? And, certainly I think that working with someone like the Georgetown crossover youth model that has done this successfully in a number of jurisdictions where they've had to overcome these issues and figure out ways to balance youth privacy with, making sure that important information is shared by those who really need it is something that, we did not have the bandwidth to go through all the possibilities, but yeah, we feel like if other agencies and other jurisdictions have overcome this, that it's certainly something that DC can do as well.
Great. We've got another question from Derek Davis. Do you think vocational education can help with the youth?
We didn't go into specific programs, but certainly, one of the comments that the youth had there about, looking for career paths, certainly shows that, education is right for some youth, a vocational path is right for others. And, I know that some of that work is done at in these agencies. So, I would say generally speaking, it's good. I don't know in terms of if there's any differences that we would want to look at for this population versus youth who are involved in one or the other system.
Great. Those are all the questions that we have in the Q&A right now. But if anyone else has any, please feel free to either drop them in the Q&A or if you're able to take yourself off mute and ask them orally.
It may require a raising hand to be able to, for you to take them off of mute if they'd like to be live.
Understood.
You have one hand, Charles Boston. Up.
Go ahead, Charles.
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the questions. Awesome report. So my question is this, because not only was I a crossover youth, I've also have done some programming and have tried to do more relatable programming with DYRS. And one of the things I found is that young people, they don't feel safe in their community, like at all. I'm an arborist by trade. I was, one of the things I was doing was working with young people, teaching them about the field of arboriculture, and just caring for other living things. And even with that being a field that's in need of young people, the industry is starved of talent. And what I found invariably that most of our crossover youth, or those that's within DYRS, they don't feel safe at all. And it's sad because it was a situation where I had 4 youth that I were training, and they all told me that they wouldn't live through the summer, and they did not. And 3 of their murders are still unsolved to this day. And so we have to find a way to protect them, where they are. And that's something that MPD should be involved with, DPR, the school system, because it's, these agencies in question care for the youth once they've gotten to a certain level, but where you generally spend their time at school, the rec centers, we just have to find a better way to address them so they can feel safe. Because with the training that I was offering, they were like, I can't be normal. I can't, not have a gun to protect myself or have something to protect myself because my neighborhood is beefing with this neighborhood, and they can't control that because that's where their parents, stay at. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know that we saw that in some of the data that, the DC medical examiner had on youth deaths in the district. And, certainly that's something that's top of mind for us and for a lot of folks in the district. Yeah, I wish I could say I had some easy answers, but I think it's definitely an avenue for future conversations and more focus. So I don't know if Misty, if you wanted to add anything or if you had any thoughts. Misty is our executive director and is on the call as well. I know this has been an issue that's been on her mind a lot.
No, thank you. I'm happy to listen. I know I want to make sure there's plenty of time for some of the other commentary that's been going. Yeah, much appreciated.
Thank you, Charles.
Great. We have another question in the Q&A from Michaela Deming. She says, I am concerned about the reality of CFSA sharing more information to DYRS for youth. For domestic violence, we want youth to feel safe sharing information about their situation. But if the information is shared with our carceral system, it seems it might have a cooling effect on youth seeking help. How would this information sharing not lead to more youth or their families being incarcerated? She continues, the difference in purpose or perceived purpose, family safety versus prosecution, stands out as a particular factor when considering closer collaboration between these systems. Not wanting youth to use not wanting to use information from the youth who are seeking safety to be used against them, for example, with a chilling effect and less safety long term.
Well, thanks, Michaela. And, I think it's definitely worth, I hope that, we're hoping that this will spark more conversations about sort of implementing better approaches for crossover youth. And I hope that you will participate in those and, help share your perspective to make sure that we're not, sort of the medical model, first do no harm, right? So we don't want any changes to actually be harmful for youth. And so looking at ways to do that, is something that, I think your perspective especially would be important at the table. And
Tracy,
directly impacting people that you work with as well.
and of course, I eat my own words. This is Misty from CCE. In our recommendations, we recommend table setting that is intersectional and community partner involved so that it is not simply governmental stakeholders at the table figuring out what information, but to the extent that we move forward with creating MOUs, data sharing, and protocols for the district, those have to include advocates for the youth and their families, so that we are threading those needles really thoughtfully. But as far as just population understanding, demographics, and need, it shouldn't mean conveying real-time sensitive information about the young people as much to understand their overall needs as it is. So there's a level of understanding the population and their needs, and then there's a case management and collaboration element, and those do, we believe, have different needs for those sensitivities.
And one of the recommendations is to have the crossover youth practice model folks come and talk about their work in these other jurisdictions, and also for DC to talk directly with other jurisdictions who've done this work. And I think that would really help to inform efforts moving forward, especially around sensitive data sharing, as you mentioned.
Thank you. The next question is from Andrea Jones. Is there any data around youth with disabilities and their concerns?
There is not any data about youth with disabilities. And I think this is a really important point that you make, right? So, to the extent that, we, especially as Misty points out, if we don't even really understand the extent of what share of crossover youth have disabilities, what accommodations are available to them. I mean, this is definitely a question that should be part of future conversations. And it was hard, the fact that there's virtually no data at all, it just speaks to the needs of the district to really focus on this population and learn more about what their situations are and how they can be addressed most effectively. And I don't think we can do that if we don't know the extent to which these youth have disabilities and the scope of these disabilities. But thank you for that question. We'll add it to our list of data we need to get.
Our next question is from an anonymous attendee asking, does the data include specific specific basis for neglect that lead to CFSA court cases? For example, physical abuse, unwilling caretakers, substance use, etc.
We only had top line data from the Superior Court for some obvious reasons. So it would say it was a neglect case, or it would say it was a delinquency case. So we do not, in our data, we did not know sort of the scope of those situations. I mean, we did look at in the DORS case files, when we looked at the ACEs, and we sort of went through and tried to sort of categorize them, you know, we're able to see that, that there were cases with neglect, but we did not, make an effort to sort of do anything farther than that, so, or abuse. So, you know, it was, yes, I'll just stop there.
All right, and then the last question we have in the chat is, what targeted services have been shown to improve outcomes for crossover youth?
Sure. So, I think the one that we saw that was had the largest impact was, and again, I would say that, you know, we can, you know, talking with other jurisdictions who don't necessarily have, you know, literature written about them would be super helpful, but, you know, providing youth with these positive experiences. So, and I think this is why the Credible Messenger program is seen as effective by these young people, because it is positive interactions with adults, right? Who are providing needed support and guidance, who feel like that you feel like they understand them in their situation, and opportunities to engage in positive activities in a safe environment, as was mentioned. So you know, looking at ways to provide recreational opportunities, improving educational opportunities, and you know, looking for those positive experiences. In terms of other services, you know, one of the areas that we saw as a need, and I meant to sort of circle back around to it, is psychiatric services and mental health services, which many of these youth who have been, you know, exposed to community violence, have other traumatic experiences in their lives, really trying to address some of these issues that have impacted them, and providing that care that can help them move forward productively with their lives, and address some of these needs. I mean, we see that many of them, you know, do have a mental health diagnosis from some of the limited data that we looked at, and you know, we know that that's always, and these services are not cheap, that's for sure, but they have they're worth every penny for the youth and allowing them to move on with their lives. We've heard from a number of folks that, especially youth who have serious psychiatric issues that require residential care, there's not sufficient placements that are available to them in the district. And so that is an issue that was a service that was identified as a real need here in the district.
Oh, we just got another question. Is there a fiscal impact for this cross-agency data sharing proposal? Thinking about how human services in general took a big hit this budget season, and if more information is the intervention that youth most need at this time. From my point of view, the services that would be deployed from this information sharing proposal don't have the funding necessarily.
Yeah, we did not do a fiscal impact statement.
All right, next question. Will there be a more comprehensive report or an attempt to follow the youth in question that this report was based off of?
So the youth is sort of, the report is not based off of identified youth. So first off, I mean, we had you know, we had groups of youth who had been formerly crossover youth who are now young adults, and so they presented their retrospective experiences for a variety of reasons. We felt that was more appropriate than you know, for both privacy, but also other reasons to work with young adults who had recently been crossover youth. And the data is from the court. So I would say that, you know, for us, it's really a matter of bringing the agencies together to work on this issue at this point. You know, CCE is, you know, if they're asking us to help facilitate some of those meetings, we're certainly open to that. But this is really an opportunity for leadership in the district to get together and start to craft some solutions and interventions that address these issues. So, you know, we're hopeful that some of the convening agencies, for example, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, perhaps, or others that, you know, work across agency could be helpful in this as well. So that's where we think the next step goes. I don't think that another report from us is needed, but I certainly think a report that better identifies the scope of crossover youth in the district by the agencies themselves, and looking at trying to include the agencies like CSSD and Maryland juvenile justice agencies, so that we have a better idea than just these two agencies, since so many of the youth are involved across systems. Multiple systems would be important as well. Obviously, the Office of the Attorney General can play an important role, because one of the interventions that has been seen to be effective with crossover youth is diversion. So looking at ways to identify youth who can be diverted from the system so they don't experience the youth justice system or go deeper into the youth justice system would be an important additional way that the district can start moving forward, and having those agencies working together would, I think, have the largest benefit.
Well, we have no more questions in the Q&A, but if people come up with them, please drop them soon. Otherwise, I think we can let you go and give you 10 minutes of your day back.
Thank you very much for attending.
Yeah, thank you.